Hello everybody, I'm Lucy, this is Jacob, and this is Marissa. And today we are going to tell you about habitat loss, over-exploitation, and how these affect biodiversity. So to get started, the value of biodiversity can be placed into two categories. The first is intrinsic, and this focuses on the moral right to protect and conserve species. For instance, the Noah Principle states that we should protect a species simply because it exists. So why shouldn't we protect a species if we are all part of nature? The second is anthropocentric, and this focuses on the functional uses that species have to us humans. This can focus on economic, recreational, aesthetic uses, on purposes to what the environment can give back to us, as shown in this diagram.
This is a great example to show intrinsic and anthropocentric value. As you can see here, ego represents anthropocentric, where we consider ourselves to be on top of the food chain, whereas here, in intrinsic value, we consider ourselves to be part of the ecosystem as a whole, just as Lucy said about the Noah Principle. But unfortunately, due to the demand that we put on our ecosystems, the biodiversity is under a great deal of pressure. But before we start, I want you to think about one thing. Do you consider us as a species to be above all others or part of the ecosystem as a whole?
So let's get started. As explained in the UN's third Global Biodiversity Outlook, the rate of biodiversity has been reduced because of 5 main principal pressures: habitat loss and degradation, climate change, excessive nutrient load and other forms of pollution, over-exploitation and unsustainable use, and invasive alien species. For today, we're going to have a look at habitat loss and over-exploitation of our environmental resources. We're doing this because we believe that these two factors demonstrate the most dire effects on biodiversity, as well as showing our effect on biodiversity as a species.
So how does habitat loss affect biodiversity? Habitat loss is the largest single cause of biodiversity loss worldwide. It reduces the usefulness of the environment and may cause habitat fragmentation. And this can lead to being harder to find mates and therefore will reduce the gene pool of that population. Secondary succession may also occur, and this changes the local biodiversity, which could in turn cause permanent loss of biodiversity among one species in that environment. A great example of this on a global scale is the loss of the polar ice caps. Jacob, I know you've been looking at this.
Due to the effects of climate change over the last few decades, we have seen our polar ice caps shrinking rapidly. Due to this, there have been new waterways opening up, and the polar ice cap landscape itself has become more fragmented. This has both positive and negative effects for the biodiversity of the region. As the ice shrinks back, coastal areas, which were once covered by ice, are now free for colonisation by pioneer species. Due to the retreat of ice shelves, coastal areas which were once covered by ice are now free for colonisation by pioneer species. And water bodies benefit from increased heat and temperature, which increases primary productivity in the water column. However, at the same time, this reduces ice scouring on the seabed, which can reduce biodiversity on a larger scale, as pioneer organisms will be outcompeted by dominant organisms. The Arctic is home to a number of highly competitive communities, such as barnacles and bryozoans. These communities have an intense pattern of succession, as more dominant species overtake the other. The less dominant species rely on scouring to destroy established communities and provide new habitat they can then quickly colonise before being overwhelmed. Due to reduced frequency of icebergs in the future, the habitat will become dominated by the more successful species, reducing biodiversity.
Taking an example closer to home, the European hedgehog, also known as Erinaceus europaeus, were once a familiar sight in grasslands and gardens, but now it is estimated that a quarter of the population has been declined due to habitat loss and degradation. Urbanization and village development are just a few key factors in the decline, as this may destroy hedgerows and grasslands where the hedgehogs build their nests underground. For the remaining hedgehogs, habitats are not very hedgehog-friendly, as smaller and tidier gardens with fencing prevent hedgehogs from moving between them and finding food or mates. As for new buildings and roads, they fragment suitable habitats so that small populations become isolated and more vulnerable to local extinction. Tens of thousands of hedgehogs each year are killed by road traffic, and these deaths might be an important cause of decline locally. I guess you can say that spines are a little defense against wheeled predators.
That's a good point, Marissa. I suppose this could be applied to exploitation as well. This rapidly decreases biodiversity among a population by not allowing there to be replacement in the depleted individuals. This involves the harvesting of a species above their maximum sustainable yield. This means that the species physically can't return to their previous state of ecological sustainability. Massive overexploitation can also lead to extinction of said species, resulting in a permanent loss of biodiversity and, if a keystone species, creates an atrophic cascade where another species can lose their biodiversity as well. Jacob here has been looking at a very familiar topic relating to this.
Probably the most well-known case of overexploitation are the world's rainforests. In the past, they used to cover at least 12% of the globe, but now only cover 5%. From looking at the figure here, you can see that the rate of deforestation has been less than predictable. We're lucky that concern for conservation in recent years has seen the rate of deforestation dropping rapidly. As you can see from 2004, deforestation has been on an almost constant decline, dropping from 27,000 hectares in 2004 to around 5,000 in 2013. It is believed that rainforests hold at least 2/3 of the world's species, most of which are completely unique to the rainforest. Unfortunately, the vast majority of these species are unknown, which when trying to calculate the loss of biodiversity in the rainforest makes it incredibly hard. But we can at least imagine that due to such huge number of species present in the rainforest, when even a single hectare of rainforest is lost, there must be a huge effect on the local species.
In the UK, especially in Scotland, fish stocks have taken a battering, leaving Brits reliant on foreign cod and haddock, probably for fish and chips. In a year, the UK imports more than 101,000 tons of cod, worth £372 million, and 60,000 tons of haddock, and that's worth £156 million, and the majority of which comes from outside the EU. 70% of all EU fish stocks are being overexploited, and this population decline can lead to biodiversity loss, which would eventually lead to trophic cascades of other species within the food web. From an anthropocentric approach, these losses in fish stocks cause massive economic loss for fishermen. In an effort to preserve dwindling stocks, by UK law, fishermen are subject to a quota system in order to try and limit the number of species taken.
So, after listening to us, have you thought about the question we asked you earlier at the start? Do you consider us, as a species, to be above all others, or part of the ecosystem as a whole? So, we gave you just a few examples of habitat loss and exploitation, globally and in the UK, and the impacts on which it has on our own environment. We, personally, think of ourselves as part of the ecosystem. What do you think? So, after listening to us, have you thought about the question we asked you earlier? Do you consider... Okay, so,
Probably for fish and chips. But... It's funny.
Hello everybody, I'm Lucy, this is Jacob, this is Marissa.
Case of overexploitation. That was all just the stuff. That was all just noises.